Working here?
What community? Jews can no longer own businesses. That's why this one's in receivership.
Ah, but they wouldn't own it. I'd own it. I'd pay them back in product, pots and pans.
Pots and pans?
Something they can use. Something they can feel in their hands. They can trade it on the black market, do whatever they want. Everybody's happy. If you want, you could run the company for me.
Let me understand. They'd put up all the money. I'd do all the work. What if you don't mind my asking what you do?
I'd make sure it's known the company's in business. I'd see that it had a certain panache. That's what I'm good at. Not the work, not the work. The presentation.
The character of Oskar Schindler being German and a Nazi and a war profiteer and a womanizer and all these interesting inconsistencies and paradoxes and the least likely candidate to save anyone except himself, perhaps.
We're doing well.
Yes.
Better this month than last?
Yes.
Any reason to think next month will be worse?
The war could end.
In 1943, the Nazis decided to stop the ghettos, to bring the ghettos to a halt, and to select a workforce from the Jews in the ghetto, tens of thousands of them. Those who could work would take their Blauscheins, their work permits, and have their Blauscheins torn up because they would be put in forced labor camps, such as the one that Amon Get ran at Plaszow. Others would be selected and sent away to transport. Transport meaning they would be sent away to Treblinka, Gross Rosen, Auschwitz-Birkenau, and they would just go to death. Children, old people. But there would be a workforce selected, and the workforce would be sent to forced labor camps.
Herr Kommandant! Very good, Sir Ludwig. I respectfully report I've been given orders to clear the bundles from the road, so there will be no obstructions to the thoroughfare.
Thomas, enjoying the lines, little Polish clicking soldier.
Amon-Gert was an Obersturmführer. He was the commander of the garrison of Sonderkommandos who would come into the Krakow ghetto. His reward was that he would be made commandant of the Plaszow forced labor camp.
I go to work the other day. Everybody's gone.
They're not gone. They're here.
I don't know how to talk about Amon-Get because on the surface he's an evil man, and he is evil personified. He's the devil.
Just now when I saw the gentleman playing Amon-Get, I froze inside, even so many years after the war, because we never knew what to expect. Shooting, beating, deportation, whatever.
When I cast a movie, and I cast a movie well, people say to me, that was good casting. Well, obviously, the architects of the final solution cast very well the men and women who were in charge of the final solution. Otherwise, these people might have been in jail. In a normal time in Germany, they would be in jail for murder. They'd be psychopathic. Every day, workers at Plaszow expected would be their last day. Life was like a disposable napkin. You never knew when your time would come. It was just, every day was surviving. When you came to the end of the day and you saw the sunrise, it was 1 hour of life is still life, as the Jewish saying goes. The Amon-Get would often, in the morning, go to his balcony with his high-powered hunting rifle, and smoking, he would look around to see who wasn't working hard enough. And he was a crack shot, and he would aim his rifle, and he would destroy the life of someone who he felt was malingering, or even taking a break and panting and out of breath. And he did this constantly. You know, no one knows how many lives Amon-Get actually took himself, but people think it was certainly over several hundred.
This is Mr. and Mrs. Pantierer, Mr. Abe Zuckerman, Mr. and Mrs. Broder. They were on Schindler's List. We're children of the Pantierers. I'm Betty Schwartz, my brother Larry Pantierer, my sister Elisa Pines. This is Mr. Zuckerman's daughter, Ruth Katz, on the end. This is my daughter, Julie Schwartz, and my sister's son, Justin Pines. There's more, and we're living proof of what Oskar Schindler did for the Jewish people.
The Jews didn't cost anything. You paid the SS for the Jews, which was about 2 marks a day less than you paid for Poles who worked directly for you, and you paid them directly. Schindler, being a good businessman, and I don't think wearing his heart on his sleeve so early in his life, made a good business decision just to save overhead by hiring a workforce that wasn't so expensive.
I asked Oskar, tell me, why did you do it? He said, I was a Nazi, but I couldn't stand the killing.
Well, Schindler protected his Jews by protecting himself first. He fed his Jews more calories a day than other Jews were experiencing in other factories. Schindler wanted a healthy workforce. Schindler, I think, was also a good man. Bottom line, I think he was a good person. I think because he was a good person, he treated his Jews well, because he was grateful to them, because they were making for him a lot of money, and also because they were people. And he looked upon them as people. He never went in for the Untermensch philosophy, subhuman theory that was coming down from Orienberg in Berlin. He looked upon these people as a necessary workforce, and as he was getting fat off their efforts, they were being well fed, and Schindler would do little acts of kindness. He would walk through the ranks of the factory workers feeling very proud this was his factory and these were his people. And he'd be smoking a cigarette, he'd take 2 puffs off a fresh cigarette, and he'd drop it and not step on it, knowing that a Jewish worker could pick it up and trade it for more soup or more bread. This was just part of his nature. He was born with this. You know, he wasn't a saint at birth. He was actually the opposite. But he was born with an act of decency, and he had a perspective between good and evil. In 1944, the extermination process increased because Germany knew it was losing the war. And Hitler's main goal at this point was to win the war of annihilation of the Jewish culture, the Jewish race, the Jewish idea. Oskar Schindler realized that all his workers were being taken away from him, and they were going to be sent to a number of death camps, most likely Auschwitz-Birkenau, which is only 40 kilometers away from downtown Krakow. Oskar Schindler put together a list of workers' names, men and women and children and investors, from his factory and from other factories in the Plaszow forced labor camp district. And he bought these names with money that he had earned based on the labors of those Jewish workers, and gave that money to Amin Get, because Amin Get had to approve the workers that Schindler was taking with him, on the pretense that he was going to build a factory in Brindlitz, Czechoslovakia, his hometown, by the way, and take all his workers there because they were already a trained workforce. He didn't want to start from scratch training a new workforce. That was the cover story he gave to Amin Get. Schindler was very smart, never to be caught and never to be thought of as someone who loved Jews. He convinced the world that he loved money and women and alcohol.
The list is alive.
A real key to the movie is the relationship between Oskar Schindler and Itzhak Stern. Itzhak Stern is actually a combination of a couple of characters, most notably Abraham Bankier. The key is that Itzhak Stern was kind of like Oskar Schindler's conscience. Stern had a very clever way of making suggestions to Schindler that would, in its own right, save Jewish lives. Oskar Schindler was a wonderful executive producer, to compare it with our industry. And he hired the best people to do the best job. And in a sense, it was Oskar Schindler presents Abraham Bankier and Itzhak Stern, who did a lot of the work for Oskar, including he ran his factory, they kept his records, kept his accounts.
What are you doing?
What? Scratching my head. Makes them think we have lice. Helps make them keep their distance.
Do you have light?
You have your notebook. The calendar on my desk has the birthdays of our SS friends' wives and children. Don't forget to send something. The Armaments Board, the Governor General's Division of the Interior, and Chief of Police as fees. And make them on the 1st of each month. As opposed to individual payoffs to our SS contacts. The list is in the lower drawer of my desk, which you... SS contacts list, lower drawer of my desk, which you handle as cash contributions to legitimate charities, sent, of course, through each official's office. Dealings with our black market contacts listed as suppliers in the legitimate ledger are
Forget
more
it.
complicated. What do you mean, forget it? You
It
can't
gives me a
forget it. You
headache. It
can't
gives me a
forget it.
headache.
Herr Director, don't let things fall apart. I work too hard.
Certainly all the major elements in Schindler's List are absolutely true. I had to combine characters. I had to take incidents from one character's life and allow another character who never experienced those incidents to carry those memories. Otherwise, I would have 100 storylines all going in the same direction, and we would never be able to do the movie that way. The movie is as true as the witnesses testified to Thomas Keneally, which was our main source. When I began to research the sources, I tried very hard to establish two sources before I put the piece of information in the film. If two people told me the same thing, like a good reporter, that became part of the story. There are things that might be apocryphal. No one really knows if Oskar Schindler himself went to Auschwitz-Birkenau to save the women. Everybody knows that Oskar Schindler did save the women from Birkenau. Some people think he sent a hooker to sleep with Hess and give him diamonds, and that's why the women were released. And other people think that Oskar Schindler actually paid a personal visit to Hess in order to convince him to let the women go.
We were on the list to go to Brinnitz directly to his camp. Instead, we wound up after a train ride of a whole night and a whole day in Auschwitz, and we never thought that we ever going to get out of there. Instead, after 3 weeks, almost the whole group, without one woman, older lady who unfortunately was killed already by that time, we went on our way to Brinnitz, and until we arrived and saw Schindler, we still didn't believe that we are there. And he was standing in that courtyard in his factory. As we walked in, really the ghosts of woman, not woman, you know.
Well, I'm very careful when I compare my experience making Schindler's List with the experience of the actual events in history, because all the pain that I suffered and my family went through and my crew and cast went through in reenacting the story is nothing. It is a weekend in Miami Beach compared to one day in the life of any survivor or any one of the 6 million memories on any given day of the Holocaust. And I always have to put that in very, very careful perspective. And I use that feeling because when there were days for me that were so unbearable, I wanted to quit at 1 o'clock and send everybody back to the hotel. I didn't want to do the movie anymore. The memories were in every location I filmed. They were in the walls of the buildings that actually stood in 1939 and behind the walls of the ghetto, which are still there today. There were ghosts haunting all of us. I mean, we all sensed that we were there for a very important reason, but we also knew that what we were doing was very, very painful. And there wasn't a day that went by where I didn't feel sick in here and sad in my heart. Schindler's List is different than anything else I've done, setting aside the concept, the idea of what Schindler's List is about. That aside, I took an approach of a documentarian more than a David Lean approach, which I love quoting and taking in my films, because I wanted the experience to be a personal experience and not really seen through the eyes of a camera. I tried to make the camera as much a part of the storytelling than a character in itself. Most of my movies, the camera is a character. But in this story, in this recreation, which I think is more of a document, a remembrance than an actual motion picture production, I wanted the camera to sort of be invisible. And to do that, I took what I call news camera approach in filming some of the scenes like the liquidation of the ghetto, the health action at Prashov. Many, many scenes were handheld and not planned. I didn't plan shots. I didn't sit home at night making shot lists or doing storyboards as I usually do. I just created the scene with the actors and all the people playing playing Jews and Poles and Germans. And then I would just wander into the scene like I was an eavesdropper with the camera to try to make the existence of the camera very second nature to what was happening in front of the camera.
May I tell you something? When I was yesterday, the first time I was living through the ghetto liquidation again, I saw the people, a friend of mine, like Dr. Alexandrovich over there, the scene in the hospital, execution of these people over there. I was there, I saw this, I lived it through it. And I think so this is a very important aspect of the movie, to show the truth. This happened.
Many of the German actors who interviewed for Schindler's List, and I saw many of their interviews on tape, many of them actually, knowing I was watching the tape, or would be watching the tape, apologized for the generation preceding theirs, and talked about their guilt, and talked about their feelings, and very openly. I was so surprised at how many German actors would actually look at the camera, into the video camera, and talk to me 6,000 miles away. It was sort of a fascinating experience. When I got there, and I began to work on Schindler's List, once those same German actors put on the uniforms of the Waffen-SS, my attitude changed, and I couldn't talk to them. I couldn't, and between shots they would be schmoozing with me, trying to ask me questions about E.T. and Raiders of the Lost Ark, questions that someone who liked those movies would ask the director. And I didn't really want to make small talk. I couldn't get past the uniform, and then my prejudice began to come out, and I began to look at it, and I began to say, my goodness, how could I be blaming, the sins of the fathers onto the sons and daughters? Why do I feel this way? And yet I felt anger when I saw the uniform. And I knew there was a German in that uniform. I felt anger. And then one day, an amazing thing happened, very early in the schedule, thank goodness. We had Passover. And we went to the Hotel Forum for the Seder. There's a rabbi there, and a lot of my crew and cast came in. And then in walks all the German actors. They put on yarmulkes. They sat next to the Israeli actors. And the Israelis opened up the Haggadahs, the prayer books, and began to show the German actors what Passover is all about. And I cried because I saw something beautiful that was essentially an entire generation of young German actors that are not culpable and should never be blamed and should never have any fingers pointed at them for something that they weren't around to stop. I don't think there can ever be a film or a book or a television presentation or a documentary that can ever represent the true, pure horror of the Shoah. Nothing can ever approximate it or even get close. But if this film can at least give a musk from it, a sense of it, and people suddenly look back to say, I can't look forward until I look back at this.
When we disappear from this life and we're fading away slowly, we're getting old, at least the pictures will stay as a proof that something like this, that the inhumanity man to man was something that never happened before, and I hope that people will learn something from the movie and will not happen again.
You should care about this film if you care about people, if you care about humanity, and if you care about the Holocaust ever happening again. And in a way, in a microcosm, it's happening right now in Bosnia. And it happens periodically with the Iraqis against the Kurds. And we see this happening in our own lives right now. And we see that neo-Nazism today, is attractive to certain people. And there's been a rising surge of violence from neo-Nazi groups with the reunification of Germany. And I think there's a lot of reasons that we can never forget the Holocaust. You go to some movies to be entertained, and you go to all my movies to be entertained, but with this movie, you go to this movie to be informed, and I think to be changed, I hope. Well, at the end of the war, before Schindler left Czechoslovakia, he was given a ring made from the gold in the teeth of one of his own workers. And a jeweler inscribed on this ring in Hebrew from the Talmud he who saves one life saves the world entire. And it is really why people should see Schindler's List, because you don't have to be Wallenberg, you don't have to be Oskar Schindler, you don't have to be a saint to save the world. You know, to save a life creates so many, countless generations. And that was the message I wanted people to hear, that generations were saved by Oskar Schindler. 1,300 people spawned 6,000 descendants, compared to the 4,000 descendants that are alive in Poland today, down from 3 million Jews before 1939.